The morning of my cousin Emily's wedding carried the kind of air that made everything seem polished, rehearsed, perfect. Cars lined the driveway of the church, voices floated in laughter and chatter, and the entire world appeared as if it were on display. But beneath that carefully painted surface was me, someone who had been made invisible long before this day arrived. I had told myself countless times to skip it. Why put myself through the charade of pretending I belonged among people who had never hidden their disdain for me? Yet something deeper than pride pushed me forward that morning. It wasn't just about Emily's wedding, it was about proving, at least to myself, that I could face the family who had so often made me feel like a stranger in my own bloodline. The first thing I saw as I stepped toward the church doors was my mother. She looked like she had been waiting specifically for me. Dressed immaculately in a silver dress, her hair styled to perfection, she was a portrait of composure. Her smile was sharp, the kind that cut rather than warmed. I should have recognized it as a warning. As I reached for the handle, she stepped forward and blocked the doorway. Her voice was soft enough not to disturb the guests gathering behind her, yet laced with venom sharp enough to pierce bone. "You're not part of this family. Leave before you embarrass us." For a moment, I froze, unable to move or breathe. The words weren't surprising. They were only a confirmation of years of being treated as the unwanted one. But standing there in front of strangers, relatives, and family friends, the sting was heavier. Conversations hushed. I felt the heat of dozens of eyes burning into my back, waiting to see what I would do. I swallowed hard, steadied my hands, and forced myself not to let the humiliation break through my expression. Without answering her, I turned away. My footsteps echoed across the stone walkway, every step weighted with the knowledge that once again, I had been made an outcast by my own mother. The streets outside the church were quieter. I walked until the voices faded behind me. For hours, I wandered the small town streets, watching as guests arrived dressed in suits and gowns, cars pulling up, the occasion swelling with joy and celebration. I should have been at the center of it all, or at least allowed to blend in unnoticed, but instead, I was on the outside looking in, exactly where my mother always wanted me. But she didn't know the whole truth. Emily had reached out to me weeks ago, her voice trembling with nerves and sincerity when she confessed she wanted me by her side in a role no one else knew about. She hadn't told her parents, hadn't told my mother, hadn't told anyone but me. She wanted it to be a moment of surprise, something only the two of us shared until the right time. Hours later, as the church bells rang and the ceremony reached its highest point, I returned. I didn't walk through the front doors this time. I entered quietly through the side, guided by someone Emily had arranged for me to meet. The air inside was heavy with the silence of reverence, the kind of quiet that magnifies every small sound. The priest's voice filled the space. "We now welcome the bride's chosen honor guest." The words sliced through the silence like a knife. Heads turned instantly, eyes sweeping the church in confusion, curiosity, disbelief. And then I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the marble aisle as I walked, the sound echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. Every gaze found me, some wide with surprise, others narrowed in suspicion. I didn't falter. Each step carried me closer to Emily, who stood at the altar in her flowing white gown, tears glistening on her cheeks as she extended her hand toward me. Gasps rippled through the room. The whispers started, rushing from one side of the pews to the other, families exchanging bewildered looks. My mother, standing in the front row, turned slowly. Her face drained of color, her carefully crafted smile collapsing as if someone had stripped her mask away in front of everyone. Emily's grip tightened around mine when I reached her. Her tears weren't for the wedding, not for the day, but for me, for the years I had endured, for the way I had been treated, for the truth she had always known. She held my hand high, turning to face the crowd as her voice carried, trembling yet firm. "This is the person who has stood by me when no one else did. The one who never left, even when it was easier to turn away. I chose her to stand here because she has been more than family to me. She has been my anchor." The silence was suffocating. No one dared to interrupt. My mother's hands tightened into fists against the satin fabric of her dress. She had orchestrated so many moments where I was invisible, where I was dismissed, but now, under the bright lights and the eyes of everyone she sought approval from, she was powerless. The air inside the church felt different after Emily's words. It wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was a battlefield of stares and whispers. Every guest had their own version of what they thought they understood, but no one knew the full truth. The priest hesitated, his eyes flickering between us as though unsure whether to continue. Yet Emily didn't release my hand. She held it tighter, her jaw set, her voice steady as she turned to face her family. I asked her to stand here because, when everyone else walked away, she didn't, she said. When I felt small, she reminded me I was enough. She's been my family when blood wasn't. The weight of her statement silenced the hall again. I didn't speak, I didn't need to. My presence alone was louder than anything I could have said. Across the room, my mother shifted, her polished composure unraveling under the eyes of relatives who had never seen her falter. She had built a reputation as the perfect hostess, the proud mother, the woman who always stood tall in every gathering. But now, for the first time, she couldn't hide behind her smile. I watched her grip the edge of the pew, her knuckles pale. The woman who told me minutes earlier to leave before I embarrassed the family was now the one standing exposed, stripped of her control. Her lips pressed together as if holding back the storm she wanted to unleash. The ceremony continued, though the atmosphere had shifted entirely. People no longer looked at Emily in admiration of her dress or the groom's vows. Their eyes darted between me and my mother, piecing together a story they had only caught fragments of over the years. Whispers traveled from pew to pew, cousins leaned closer to their parents, aunts whispered into ears, and no one pretended not to notice anymore. When it ended and the couple sealed their vows, applause filled the church. But even as clapping echoed through the room, I could sense the tension brewing beneath it. The walk back down the aisle was heavier than before. Emily led the way with her husband, yet when she turned slightly, she motioned for me to follow just behind them. Guests stood as we passed, their smiles brittle, some confused, others intrigued, and a few undeniably pleased to witness the spectacle. My mother didn't move. She remained rigid in the front row, her eyes fixed on me with an expression that could have cut glass. For years, she had dismissed me behind closed doors, but now, her cruelty had been dragged into the open. Her mask cracked, and I knew she was already plotting what would happen once the reception began. Outside, the sunlight was blinding, reflecting off the decorated cars waiting to carry the bridal party. Photographers lined the steps, calling for Emily and her new husband, but she waved one toward me. "Get one of us together," she said, pulling me close. The camera clicks echoed louder than they should have. My mother stood only a few feet away, watching the flash capture a moment she couldn't erase. I saw her hand tremble as she lifted her purse tighter against her chest. The ride to the reception hall was filled with chatter from the bridal party, laughter, and celebration, but beneath it, I felt Emily's hand find mine again. She didn't have to explain why she had done it. The truth was already clear in her actions. Still, she leaned closer and whispered, "I wasn't going to let them erase you." Her words were both a comfort and a warning. Because the moment we stepped into that hall, I knew the confrontation I had avoided all my life was waiting. The reception hall was decorated flawlessly, white linens, golden accents, floral arrangements hanging from chandeliers. The smell of food filled the air, glasses clinked, and the music swelled to welcome the newlyweds. Guests poured in, taking their seats, already buzzing with speculation about what had unfolded at the church. When Emily and her husband entered, cheers erupted. I followed at her request, but the applause wasn't as strong for me. It was hesitant, uncertain. People clapped because they didn't know what else to do. Their eyes followed me as I took my place at the table reserved for the bridal party, my chair positioned close to Emily. My mother sat several tables away, surrounded by relatives she had always commanded effortlessly. But tonight, her power slipped with every glance thrown my way, every hushed conversation she couldn't control. Her jaw tightened as her sister leaned in to ask something, nodding subtly in my direction. Dinner was served, plates filled with food that no one seemed to taste. The clinking of forks against porcelain was drowned by the low hum of whispers. Conversations circled like vultures, each one circling closer to the truth. It was during the toasts that the cracks deepened. Emily's maid of honor spoke, her voice shaky but kind, sharing memories of childhood sleepovers and teenage adventures. Then Emily stood, holding her glass, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "I want to thank someone who has always been my constant," she began. "Someone who isn't just here for today, but has been here for years when I needed her most. I wouldn't be standing here without her." Her voice caught slightly as she gestured toward me. "She is my chosen family, the one who reminded me of my worth when I doubted it. And no matter what anyone thinks, she belongs here as much as I do." The hall erupted, not in cheers but in whispers louder than ever. My mother's face turned rigid, her smile forced, her hands gripping the stem of her glass so tightly I thought it might break. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at her, others at me, torn between loyalties they had never been forced to choose before. I felt every eye on me, but I didn't look away. I met Emily's gaze, nodding slightly, and raised my glass in return. The sound of glasses clinking filled the air, though not all joined in. The divide was visible now, and no one could pretend otherwise. Afterward, when the music started and couples filled the dance floor, I felt the shift I had been waiting for. My mother rose from her table and made her way toward me. Each step deliberate, her heels clicking against the polished floor like warning shots. She stopped just short of the bridal table, her expression carved in stone. "Step outside," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the music. Emily immediately stood, blocking her path. "Not tonight," she said firmly. "This is my wedding. If you want to fight, do it somewhere else." But my mother's eyes never left mine. "You've embarrassed me enough already. Don't think this ends here." I didn't flinch. For once, I let the silence hang, refusing to fill it with excuses or apologies. She turned on her heel, retreating to her table, but I knew the storm wasn't over. The reception might have been about Emily, but underneath it all, the tension had shifted into something far larger. For years, my mother's disdain had been private, hidden behind smiles and social gatherings. Tonight, it had been dragged into the light. She couldn't undo the photographs, the speeches, the public acknowledgement. Her control was cracking, and I could feel the shift in the room as relatives began to see what had been ignored for years. Emily leaned closer, her voice steady, but filled with concern. "She's not done. Be ready." The music played on, but the tension was louder than the band. Every guest felt it. My mother sat rigid at her table, her jaw tight, her hands clenched around her napkin. She hadn't spoken to anyone since her attempt to pull me outside, and people were starting to notice. They whispered, glancing at her, then at me, then back again, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had always been in front of them but only now made sense. Emily refused to let the night be stolen from her. She danced, she laughed with friends, and she pulled me onto the floor beside her more than once, determined to show everyone that I belonged there. But I could feel my mother's eyes on me every second. It wasn't just anger, it was fear. She had built her image on being the respectable woman, the admired mother, the center of family pride. Tonight, that image cracked and she knew it. Dinner had passed, the cake was cut, and the guests were restless for the speeches that would close the night. The microphone sat at the front of the hall, waiting. I could see my mother's stare lock onto it, her mind racing. She wanted control back. She wanted her narrative restored. When she stood, the room hushed. No one asked her to speak, but no one dared stop her either. She took the microphone with a smile stretched thin across her face, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate this beautiful union," she began, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly. "Our family has always stood together, proud and strong. And tonight, we show the world that nothing can divide us." The words were meant to be graceful, but they rang hollow. Murmurs rippled through the room. My mother paused, her eyes flickering toward me before returning to the crowd. There have been misunderstandings, she continued. But let me remind you, family is about loyalty, about knowing your place and honoring those bonds properly. Some people don't always understand that. Her voice hardened with the last sentence. It wasn't subtle. Every person in the room knew who she was referring to. Before the silence could grow heavier, Emily rose from her chair and walked to the front. The guest stiffened as she stood beside her, placing a hand firmly on the microphone. "I'm going to stop you right there," Emily said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "This day is not about you. It's not about appearances. It's not about preserving lies." Gasps broke across the hall. Emily's groom stood, ready to intervene, but Emily didn't falter. She looked at the guests, then directly at my mother. "You want to talk about loyalty?" Emily asked. "Let's talk about who stood by me when no one else cared. When I called late at night, crying, she answered. When I doubted myself, she reminded me I was stronger than I believed. She has been my family in ways that blood alone never could be. And yet, she's the one you've treated like a stranger." Her words landed heavy. People shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but captivated. My mother's face turned pale again, her lips pressed tightly together as if holding back the fury that threatened to spill. Emily pressed on. "You may try to push her out, but I brought her in. I chose her. And tonight, the truth is clear. She belongs here. Maybe more than some of the rest of you." The hall erupted in whispers, but this time they weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at her. My mother lowered the microphone slowly, her hand trembling. She had lost the room. Emily turned, meeting my gaze across the tables.
"Come up here," she said.
Every head turned as I stood. My legs were steady now, no longer burdened by the shame she had tried to place on me earlier that day. I walked toward the front, my steps measured, unhurried. By the time I reached Emily, the silence was thick enough to touch. She handed me the microphone. For years, I had stayed quiet. I had accepted the shadows she shoved me into. But not tonight. "I didn't come here to fight," I began, my voice calm but strong. "I came because Emily asked me to stand by her. And I will never apologize for being here for her. What happened at those church doors, what's happened my whole life, wasn't about family. It was about control. And I won't carry that silence anymore." The room was still, every ear on me. I looked at my mother, not with anger, but with a finality she couldn't shake. "You told me I wasn't part of this family, but you're wrong. Family isn't defined by who you try to erase. It's defined by who stands with you, no matter what. And I have that. Whether you accept it or not doesn't matter anymore." I handed the microphone back to Emily and stepped aside. The guests shifted, their eyes following me, their expressions mixed, sympathy from some, discomfort from others, shock from many. But not one person looked at my mother the same way again. She returned to her seat, her body rigid, her face unreadable. She didn't speak again. The rest of the evening moved forward without her voice controlling it. Conversations grew louder. The music returned, laughter spilled across the hall, and yet she sat in silence, cut off from the power she once wielded so easily. Later, as the night wound down and guests began to leave, Emily pulled me aside. The glow of the chandelier caught the tears still shining in her eyes. "I meant every word," she said. "You've been my constant. And tonight, everyone finally saw the truth." I hugged her, not needing to say much in return. The truth had spoken for itself. When I left the hall, the air outside felt lighter, cleaner, as though I had shed a weight I had carried for too long. My mother didn't follow me. She stayed behind, surrounded by relatives who no longer looked at her with the same admiration. The control she had spent years building had slipped through her fingers in a single night, and there was no reclaiming it.